They were the faces we grew up with, the kind that made Hollywood feel permanent and familiar. Faces on the screen never seemed to age, voices never faded, and their presence felt steady, as if certain stars would always be there waiting for us. But time, quietly, rewrites every story. Behind the iconic smiles and unforgettable performances were real lives moving forward, growing older, stepping away, or slowly slipping out of view while the images remained unchanged. Some of these stars are still with us today, shaped by decades the camera never followed. Others are gone, leaving behind moments preserved in films we return to when memory does the remembering for us. This is not about scandal. It is about legacy, absence, and what remains when the applause fades. If these names once meant something to you, stay with us. Now, let's begin with a face that defined American cinema for an entire generation. For a long time, Robert Redford represented a version of America audiences wanted to believe in. Effortlessly handsome, quietly confident, and never loud about his presence, he felt like the definition of a movie star who did not need to prove anything. In films like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Way We Were, his face became shorthand for freedom, romance, and a certain kind of calm masculinity that belonged to another era. But even at the height of his fame, Redford never seemed fully comfortable inside the machinery of Hollywood. While the industry pushed him toward endless leading man roles, he quietly resisted becoming a product. He avoided scandal, guarded his private life, and slowly shifted his attention away from the spotlight that had made him famous. At a time when visibility was everything, Redford chose distance. As the decades passed, that distance became part of his legacy. His appearance changed. The golden ease softened by age, yet his authority only grew. He transitioned into directing and producing, helping create spaces where stories mattered more than celebrity. The founding of Sundance was not just a career move, but a statement about what cinema could still be when it stopped chasing noise. Today, Robert Redford is no longer the face audiences once rushed to see on opening night. Instead, he exists as something rarer, a memory that aged with dignity. His films remain unchanged, while the man himself stepped back on his own terms. And in a world where most stars fight time, Redford quietly accepted it. And just as Hollywood was learning to let go of that kind of restraint, the next legend chose an entirely different path. Al Pacino never looked like a traditional Hollywood leading man, and that was exactly why audiences could not look away. His intensity felt dangerous, his voice carried weight, and his presence suggested that something could explode at any moment. From The Godfather to Scarface, Pacino did not simply play powerful men, he embodied obsession, ambition, and the cost that came with both. At the height of his fame, Pacino became inseparable from characters who consumed themselves. Michael Corleone's quiet descent into darkness, Tony Montana's unchecked hunger, and later roles driven by rage or moral conflict shaped how the public saw him. Fame followed quickly, but it was never the polished kind. His stardom felt heavy, built on emotional extremes rather than charm. Behind the image, Pacino's relationship with celebrity was complicated. He avoided the glossy Hollywood lifestyle and often spoke about losing himself inside roles. Long stretches away from film, a devotion to theater, and a refusal to chase constant relevance set him apart from his peers. While others tried to preserve youth, Pacino leaned into time, allowing age to deepen his presence rather than hide it. Today, his face carries the marks of decades spent living inside difficult characters. The voice is slower, the energy more restrained, but the authority remains unmistakable. Audiences no longer look to Pacino for transformation, they look for recognition. He represents a time when actors were allowed to age publicly, without apology. And while some legends faded quietly, the next one embraced chaos, excess, and a reputation that became almost as famous as the films themselves. Jack Nicholson never tried to be likable in the traditional sense, and that refusal became his greatest power. With a grin that felt both inviting and dangerous, he embodied rebellion at a time when Hollywood was learning how to break its own rules. From Easy Rider to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Nicholson brought an edge that suggested the character might slip out of control at any moment. At his peak, Nicholson did not chase variety. He deepened a persona audiences could instantly recognize. Authority figures with cracks, men laughing a second too long, charm that masked something darker underneath. Fame followed him everywhere, and unlike many stars, he did not run from it. He leaned into excess, became a regular headline, and allowed his off-screen reputation to blur with the characters he played. But as the years passed, Nicholson did something unexpected. He stepped away. No farewell tour, no dramatic announcement, just a quiet disappearance from film sets. While his face remained iconic, the man himself chose privacy over reinvention. The grin faded from public view, replaced by silence. Today, Nicholson exists almost entirely through memory. Clips circulate, lines are quoted, expressions replayed endlessly, but the present tense version of him remains elusive. He did not fight aging on camera, nor did he try to redefine himself for a new generation. He simply stopped performing, and in that absence, something rare happened. Jack Nicholson became untouchable, not because he stayed visible, but because he left at the exact moment his image could no longer be diluted. The legend froze in time, exactly where audiences remembered him. Jodie Foster grew up in front of the camera, but she never grew up for the camera. From a young age, her presence felt composed, intelligent, and unusually self-aware, as if she understood the cost of visibility long before most child actors did. Roles in Taxi Driver and The Silence of the Lambs cemented her as someone audiences did not simply watch, but listen to. At the height of her fame, Foster stood apart from Hollywood's usual expectations. She did not trade intellect for accessibility, nor did she lean into celebrity culture to remain relevant. Instead, she built a reputation on discipline, preparation, and an insistence on privacy that felt almost radical in an industry fueled by exposure. While others blurred their personal lives with their work, Foster drew a line and held it. Time changed her image, but not her position. As she aged, her performances became quieter, more restrained, relying less on transformation and more on authority. She moved behind the camera as a director, choosing projects with care, and stepping away for long stretches when the work did not feel necessary. Visibility was never the goal, control was. Today, Jodie Foster is still present, but deliberately so. Her face reflects experience rather than reinvention, and her voice carries calm confidence instead of urgency. She represents a rare model of longevity, one built on refusal rather than compromise. In an industry that often punishes women for aging, Foster chose to age on her own terms. And while some stars vanished to preserve their myth, the next legend carried his legacy through generosity, integrity, and a kind of grace that never needed explanation. Paul Newman carried movie star beauty with an ease that never felt rehearsed. Those blue eyes became iconic, but what audiences remembered most was the calm honesty behind them. From Cool Hand Luke to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Newman projected confidence without cruelty, strength without arrogance. He felt approachable in a way few leading men ever managed. At the height of his fame, Newman could have leaned entirely into stardom. Instead, he consistently pushed against it. He chose flawed characters, men shaped by regret, quiet defiance, or moral exhaustion. As Hollywood grew louder and more image-driven, Newman became more grounded. Fame never seemed to excite him as much as the work itself. Off-screen, his priorities slowly shifted. Newman turned attention toward philanthropy, building a legacy that had little to do with box office numbers. While many stars chased relevance, he redirected success into something tangible, something that outlived applause. His public image softened over time, not from decline, but from intention. As he aged, Newman did not attempt reinvention. The lines on his face became part of his authority, his voice slower but more deliberate. Audiences no longer expected him to dominate the screen. They trusted him to anchor it. When he finally stepped away, it felt less like disappearance and more like completion. Paul Newman passed away with his reputation intact, untouched by scandal or desperation. What remained was rare in Hollywood, respect earned quietly over decades. His films still play, unchanged, while the man himself is remembered not just for how he looked on screen, but for the kind of life he chose to live beyond it. And while some icons were defined by restraint, the next one became unforgettable by refusing to slow down at all. Steve McQueen was never interested in explaining himself, and that silence became his signature. He moved with restraint, spoke only when necessary, and projected a kind of cool that felt instinctive rather than performed. In films like Bullet, The Great Escape, and The Thomas Crown Affair, McQueen made confidence look effortless, as if the camera had simply caught him being himself. At his peak, McQueen became one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood, yet he resisted the systems that created him. He clashed with studios, rejected control, and guarded his independence fiercely. Fame followed him anyway, built not on charm or accessibility, but on attitude. Audiences sensed that he did not need them, and that distance only made him more magnetic. Behind the image, his life moved fast and burned hard. Risk, speed, and excess followed him off screen, and the body that once carried such quiet power began to pay the price. While other stars learned how to slow down, McQueen never truly did. Time, for him, was not something to negotiate with. His death came early, freezing his image at its most iconic. There was no gradual aging in public, no late career reinvention, no chance to soften into nostalgia. What remained was a snapshot, sharp and unchanging. The leather jacket, the stare, the stillness that felt louder than words. Steve McQueen did not fade into memory. He stopped abruptly, leaving behind a legend defined by momentum rather than longevity. And because he never stayed long enough to decline, the image survived untouched. He became the rare kind of icon time could not erode, only preserve. And just as Hollywood tried to understand restraint, the next legend showed what happened when genius refused to be contained at all. Marlon Brando did not arrive in Hollywood to fit in. He arrived to disrupt it. From the moment he appeared on screen, something shifted. His performances felt raw, unpredictable, and unsettling in a way audiences had never seen before. In A Streetcar Named Desire and later On the Waterfront, Brando stripped acting of polish and replaced it with emotional truth that felt almost invasive. At his peak, Brando was not just famous, he was revolutionary. He changed how actors spoke, moved, and existed on screen. But genius came with friction. He resisted authority, clashed with studios, and openly rejected the expectations placed on him. Fame, instead of grounding him, became another force he pushed against. The industry needed him far more than he needed it. As the years passed, Brando's relationship with Hollywood grew increasingly distant. His appearance changed dramatically, his performances became selective, and his private life drifted into isolation and loss. The man who once redefined masculinity on screen now carried visible weight, both physical and emotional. Audiences watched, unsure whether they were witnessing decline or defiance. Then came The Godfather. With minimal screen time, Brando reminded the world of his power. The performance was restrained, almost quiet, yet commanding. It felt less like a comeback and more like a reminder of who had always been in control. Marlon Brando aged publicly, imperfectly, and without apology. He never chased redemption or approval. When he passed, Hollywood lost not just an icon, but the man who taught it how to act differently. His legacy remains complicated, heavy, and impossible to replace. James Dean did not have time to become ordinary. In just a handful of performances, he captured a restlessness that felt deeply personal to a generation learning how to question authority. On screen, he looked uncertain, vulnerable, and dangerously alive. In Rebel Without a Cause, Dean became more than an actor. He became a mirror for youth that did not yet know where it belonged. At the moment his fame was beginning to crystallize, it stopped. Dean's death came so early that it erased the possibility of decline, compromise, or reinvention. There were no later roles to soften his image, no aging face to complicate the myth. What remained was potential, frozen and unresolved. Because of that, James Dean never aged in public memory. His image stayed sharp, his emotions raw, his future permanently imagined rather than witnessed. Audiences projected onto him everything he never had the chance to become. He did not live long enough to disappoint, only long enough to define a feeling. Hollywood rarely knows how to handle loss at that scale. Studios moved on, the industry adapted, but the absence lingered. Dean became a symbol not of longevity, but of interruption. A career measured not in decades, but in moments that felt unfinished. Today, James Dean exists almost entirely as an idea. Posters, photographs, and scenes replay endlessly, untouched by time. He represents the version of stardom that never learns how to age because it never had the chance. And in that silence, something powerful remains. Not what he was, but what he could have been. Elizabeth Taylor was never just a movie star. She was spectacle, emotion, and vulnerability wrapped in impossible beauty. From a young age, her violet eyes and commanding presence made her feel larger than the screen itself. In films like Cleopatra and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Taylor did not simply perform romance and desire, she carried them with an intensity that felt personal and exposed. Fame arrived early and never loosened its grip. Unlike many of her peers, Taylor lived her life openly, allowing love, heartbreak, illness, and excess to play out in full public view. Her marriages became headlines, her health struggles became tabloid material, and her body bore the visible cost of a life lived without retreat. Where others protected illusion, Taylor absorbed the consequences. As time passed, the image shifted, the flawless beauty softened, the face changed, and the voice carried experience instead of seduction. Yet something essential remained. Audiences no longer watched her for perfection, they watched her for survival. Taylor aged publicly, imperfectly, and without apology, transforming vulnerability into strength. Beyond the screen, she redirected her fame toward activism, using her visibility to fight for causes others avoided. In doing so, she redefined legacy, not as something frozen in youth, but as something earned through endurance. Her later years were quieter, marked by reflection rather than spectacle. When Elizabeth Taylor passed away, Hollywood lost more than an icon. It lost a figure who had lived every stage of fame out loud. What remains is not just beauty remembered, but courage admired. A reminder that true legend is not about staying untouched by time, but about surviving it visibly. And while her story was defined by endurance, the next legend became unforgettable through gentleness, restraint, and grace. Audrey Hepburn never needed volume to command attention. Her presence was quiet, graceful, and unmistakably different from the glamour that defined Hollywood at the time. On screen, she carried lightness without fragility, elegance without distance. In films like Roman Holiday and Breakfast at Tiffany's, Hepburn felt less like a manufactured star and more like a fleeting moment audiences were lucky to witness. Fame arrived quickly, but it never seemed to own her. While the world fixated on her beauty and style, Hepburn remained reserved, almost shy, as if she understood how easily admiration could turn into expectation. She resisted excess, avoided scandal, and protected her private life in ways few stars managed to do. The illusion of perfection followed her everywhere, even as her real life remained far more complicated. As the years passed, Hepburn's appearance changed, and her presence on screen became rarer. Illness, loss, and exhaustion shaped her later life, softening the image that once felt weightless. Instead of fighting time, she stepped away from acting altogether. Hollywood slowly faded from her daily life, replaced by something quieter and more purposeful. In her final decades, Hepburn redirected her fame toward humanitarian work, choosing service over spotlight. The camera followed less often, but the impact deepened. She aged with humility, carrying dignity rather than nostalgia. When Audrey Hepburn passed away, she left behind more than unforgettable films. She left an example of restraint in an industry built on display. Her legacy endures not because she stayed visible, but because she chose grace when visibility was no longer necessary. Marilyn Monroe was never just famous. She was desired, studied, projected onto, and endlessly misunderstood. On screen, she embodied brightness and vulnerability at the same time, a combination that felt intoxicating to audiences and deeply isolating to the woman behind it. In films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and Some Like It Hot, Monroe appeared effortless, playful, and luminous, even when the performance demanded far more than it revealed. Fame came quickly and stayed relentlessly close. Hollywood built her image with precision, then expected her to live inside it without resistance. The public adored the fantasy, while Monroe struggled with the distance between who she was and who she was expected to be. Intelligence was overlooked, insecurity was exploited, and privacy became nearly impossible to maintain. The smile never stopped being required. As time passed, the pressure intensified. Behind the glamour were exhaustion, self-doubt, and a growing sense of fragility. The industry that benefited from her image offered little protection when that image began to crack. Monroe's appearance shifted subtly, but the weight she carried was never physical. It was emotional, constant, and visible only in hindsight. Her death arrived with shock, speculation, and silence that never fully settled. Unlike others who aged into legend, Monroe became legend instantly, frozen at her most recognizable moment. There was no space for reinvention, no later chapter to complicate the story, only absence. Today, Marilyn Monroe remains one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces, yet one of its least understood lives. What endures is not just beauty remembered, but a quiet question that still lingers: how much of her was ever allowed to belong to herself? And as her image continues to echo through time, the final legend in this journey reminds us of an era when Hollywood itself felt permanent. Clark Gable represented a kind of Hollywood that no longer exists. Effortlessly masculine, confident without cruelty, and unmistakably commanding, he became the face of an era when movie stars felt permanent and larger than life. In Gone with the Wind, Gable did not just play Rhett Butler. He defined what a leading man was supposed to be for decades that followed. At the height of his fame, Gable carried authority that felt natural rather than constructed. He did not need mystery or rebellion to hold attention. His power came from presence alone. Audiences trusted him instinctively, and studios built entire productions around that trust. Fame, for Gable, was not chaotic. It was stable, controlled, and deeply tied to the identity of old Hollywood itself. As time passed, the industry around him began to change. New styles emerged, younger faces arrived, and the rhythm of stardom shifted. Gable aged into roles that reflected experience rather than dominance. The ease remained, but the spotlight softened. Unlike later generations, he did not reinvent himself to keep pace. He carried his era with him instead. His final years were marked by endurance rather than nostalgia. When Clark Gable passed away, it felt less like the loss of a single actor and more like the closing of a chapter. An entire version of Hollywood seemed to leave with him. Today, Gable exists as a symbol of permanence in an industry defined by change. His films remain polished and distant, echoing a time when stardom felt steady and final. And with him, this journey comes full circle, back to an age when legends did not chase relevance. They simply were. Time has a way of changing everything except memory. Faces fade, voices quiet, and the world moves on. But the moments these stars left behind remain untouched. Their films still play, their expressions still hold meaning, and their presence still feels familiar, even decades later. What we remember is not just how they looked, but how they made us feel. Comfort, excitement, longing, escape. In a world that keeps reinventing fame, these legends remind us of a time when stardom moved slower and carried weight. Some of them are still with us, living quietly beyond the spotlight. Others exist only through celluloid and recollection, yet together they form a shared memory that refuses to disappear. So tell me, which of these legends stayed with you the longest? Which face still feels like home when it appears on screen? If you enjoyed revisiting this era of Hollywood, consider subscribing. It helps keep these stories alive, long after the lights have dimmed and the credits have rolled.